What do you think it will take to solve this case?
DNA, definitely. They haven't, there was no other evidence there. Whoever did it did a good job at taking everything with them. What they didn't take was DNA.
Every day, murders go unsolved and eventually become cold cases. The victims' families wait for justice, which sometimes takes ages to come. While some perpetrators of these evil acts go on to commit more brutal murders, some repent and hope not to get caught. Recently, the families of unsolved murder victims have seen a glimmer of hope with the use of improved DNA technology, used to solve decades of cold cases. Here are 3 of the cold cases eventually solved with DNA in the 20s. Fawn Cox was 16 years old when she was raped, strangled, and eventually killed in her bedroom on the 26th of July 1989. Fawn was a junior at Northeast High School and had been working as a cashier at Worlds of Fun, a Kansas City amusement park, until 11 p.m. that evening when her mother, Beverly, had picked her up and brought her home. Her family said she had gone straight to bed due to how exhausted she was. Fawn's younger sisters Amber and Felisa would often sleep upstairs with her, but on the night she was murdered, she was the only one in the room upstairs. While she was sleeping, someone snuck into the house through an upstairs window and raped and strangled her in her bed. There were semen stains left behind on the bed. By the next morning, when Fawn's alarm went off at the usual 9:30 a.m. to wake her up for work and she didn't turn it off, her mother and sister came upstairs to check up on her, only to discover that she was still in bed but lying dead. Her family claimed to have not heard anything from downstairs. They said the sound of their loud air conditioner must have drowned out any noise coming from upstairs during the attack. Felisa Cox mentioned in an interview that, though the family dog got agitated at a point during the night of her sister's murder, but they attributed it to the dog being pregnant. Fawn, who was said to have just gotten her learner's permit 3 days before her murder, was a church lover. She attended church regularly with her family, and she loved Amy Grant music. When she died, her father, John, took comfort in the family's faith. The murder of Fawn shook the whole of Kansas City. In August of that year, 3 teenagers were apprehended regarding her murder, but they were later released when DNA tests failed to conclusively link them to the crime. The police stayed on Fawn's case. They followed every lead but got nowhere. The community and the family of Fawn Cox also refused to give up. Anytime there is an advancement in DNA testing, they would make sure the police used it in Fawn's case. At a point, the police were frustrated when a search of combined DNA index system, a database containing the DNA of every felon in the United States, failed to find a match. Fawn's family raised money and spoke to the media. They bought billboards that went up in Kansas City. They fought for years to get advanced DNA techniques used on the case. They held fundraisers, even offering to pay for it themselves, as the Kansas City police could not afford it. Eventually, the FBI paid for a genealogy DNA testing, and on the 11th of November 2020, after narrowing down their list of suspects, the police finally revealed Donald Cox Jr., Fawn's cousin, who was 5 years older than her, as the murderer. Unfortunately, justice could not be truly served as he had died of a drug overdose in 2006. To further prove that Donald Cox Jr. was the murderer they had wanted for decades, the investigators who had worked on Donald's death investigation had retained his blood sample during his case because they had sensed foul play in the circumstances surrounding his death. They then compared DNA from the blood sample with a DNA profile from the bodily fluids recovered from Fawn's bedroom in 1989 and discovered a match. Fawn's parents, who now have closure to the case, were sad but relieved. They said they had sometimes wondered if Donald had killed her. It turned out that their suspicion was right all along.
There's closure. The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure.
The fact that it's someone that you know well and it's actually a relative, how is the family dealing with that?
I think we're doing okay. We're doing okay. Just having answers helps.
Around 5:30 p.m. on the 23rd of August 1972, 20-year-old Jody Loomis was found by a couple who were driving up a dark dirt track off Penny Creek Road in Snohomish County, Washington. The couple had planned to go target shooting when they were hindered by a fallen tree which blocked their path as they drove up the dirt road. They then got out to move the tree aside, but were shocked to find a woman lying there conscious and dying from a gunshot wound to the head. Jody Loomis laid in the woods half naked, in her panties, high socks, and dark waffle stomper-style boots which, according to a source, she borrowed from her 12-year-old sister. Jody had been shot above her right ear. Though still alive, she was unable to speak to the couple who raced her to Stevens Hospital. Unfortunately, it was too late to revive her as she was pronounced dead upon arrival. April 23rd of 1972 appeared to have been a warm Wednesday afternoon when Jody Loomis decided to ride her white 10-speed bicycle to visit her horse at a stable 6 miles away. Dressed in a crop top, jeans, and a waffle stomper boots, Jody headed out without her parents. Usually, her parents drove her to the horse stable and dropped her off, and the day she was raped and killed was the first time she had gone to the stable on her own. Her death remained unsolved for years, haunting both her family and investigators. Both parties never gave up. The police diligently pursued the case. At a point, they passed out playing cards in jails hoping someone would come forward with information, but nothing was found. The case quickly turned cold, but the investigators and the family of Jody still had a glimmer of hope. The case was later reopened in 2008, where the evidence gotten from the crime scene was taken to a crime lab. A DNA sample was gotten from the small semen stain on Jody Loomis' boots, but the sample did not match any of the male suspects on the investigators' list. The case went cold for another decade until investigators finally had a breakthrough in 2018. The process of genetic genealogy was used by the forensics, who uploaded the genetic profile onto public ancestry websites to try to narrow down possible suspects. This DNA technique led the Washington state investigators to pinpoint Terrence Miller as a likely suspect. Miller was a retired heavy equipment operator who ran a ceramics shop with his wife in Edmonds, Washington, about 17 miles from where Jody was murdered. The police then put Miller under surveillance and eventually obtained his DNA from a coffee cup, which he had thrown out at a casino. According to investigators, the DNA sample from the coffee cup was an exact match to the DNA sample found on Jody Loomis's boot. According to reports, Terrence Miller had been accused at least 5 times with sex crimes in the 1960s. In 2019, Snohomish County Sheriff's Department arrested and charged him with first-degree murder. However, hours before Miller would be convicted by a jury, he committed suicide. Nonetheless, 3 hours after sheriff's deputies found him dead in his house, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Carla Jan Walker was born on January 31st of 1957 in Fort Worth, Texas. She was a 17-year-old cheerleader and student who was kidnapped out of her boyfriend's passenger seat on the 16th of February, 1974. Carla and her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, were sitting and waiting for friends in his car in the parking lot of Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, after attending a Valentine's dance week at Western Hills High School when suddenly, the car door swung open and the two were attacked and assaulted by an unknown person who mistakenly dropped the magazine from his gun during the attack. While trying to fight off the bad guy, McCoy was knocked into unconsciousness with the back of a pistol. When he woke up later, he discovered Carla was gone, and the last thing he remembered was her shouting, "Rodney, go get my dad." McCoy then went to Carla's house to tell her parents what had transpired. They called the police, who searched the area where she had been kidnapped. Her purse and the magazine clip the attacker left behind were the only items recovered in the parking lot. Several days later, on February 20th, 1974, Carla's body was found in a drainage culvert at Benbrook Lake. According to autopsy results, she had been alive for 2 days after her abduction, and she had also been beaten, raped, injected with morphine, tortured, and strangled to death. The police were said to have quite a number of suspects on their list during the first phase of investigation. One man named Glenn Samuel McCurley was questioned shortly after Carla's murder in 1974 because the gun magazine found in the parking lot of the bowling alley was tied to him. Apparently, he had recently purchased a pistol that used the same magazine as the one found on the crime scene. However, McCurley told investigators that his gun was stolen from his truck. After taking and passing a polygraph test, he was let off the hook. At this point, there was nothing tying him to the murder. The police, who desperately wanted answers, had obtained evidence of semen and other bodily fluids from the crime scene. They had also preserved Carla's clothing for further investigation, but due to lack of advanced technology in the 1970s, the killer could not be identified, hence, the murder remained a cold case for 46 years until in September 2020 when the police got DNA samples from the trash can outside McCurley's home. After confirming that the samples matched the DNA evidence gotten from the crime scene in 1974, investigators returned to McCurley's home where he invited them in for a talk. He repeated the same story he told the police in 1974. He claimed not to have killed anyone and said he never knew Carla Jan Walker. Investigators then asked him for a DNA sample, to which he agreed and signed a consent form. They took 2 chick swabs and sent them alongside with Carla's clothing for analysis. They were sent to Othram Inc., a lab that specializes in advanced testing of small and degraded DNA. They ended up developing a full DNA profile of the perpetrator. 6 days later, the swabs gotten from McCurley matched the DNA found on Carla's bra. This was enough to arrest and charge McCurley with capital murder. In August 2021, McCurley started his trial. The evidence presented in court included the pistol he had claimed was stolen in 1974. The pistol was found carefully hidden inside his home. By the 3rd day of his trial, McCurley pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. He is currently imprisoned in Gibb Lewis Unit and will be eligible for parole on the 21st of March 2029. As of the time of making this video, he still maintains his innocence. He once told a reporter that he pled guilty because he had had enough hounding. Finally arrested, Jim Walker, Carla's younger brother, is glad that the family eventually has a face to the gruesome murder of his sister. Jim, who became a police officer nearly 45 years ago after his sister was killed, said their parents had both died without seeing the killer, but he was able to fulfill the pledge he made to his mother.
46 years, 7 months, and 5 days. or 17,053 days ago, Carla was abducted. I would like to sit here and tell you, no, I never gave up hope. But there were really dark times, and watching the pain my mom went through. Sorry, guys. But, I can tell you, this whole case being resolved is a thank you, God moment. I know people don't like to hear that quite often, but it is.